Morgan Reed stepped through the entrance of Blackwater Ridge Shooting Range, with her competition case slung over one shoulder, her face set in quiet determination. The scent of gunpowder and metal hung in the air, mingling with the tension that seemed to follow her as she made her way past rows of shooters, adjusting their stances and sighting down barrels. She wasn't there to prove anything. She was there because precision marksmanship was embedded in her bones, something she'd cultivated since she was 12 years old, shooting tin cans off fence posts on her grandfather's property in Montana. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The registration desk was manned by a balding man with thick glasses who barely looked up as she slid her competition form across the counter. His eyes flicked over her credentials before settling on her face with a mixture of surprise and skepticism. "Women's division is tomorrow," he said, tapping his pen against the form. "This is the open qualifier for the National Precision Championship." "I know exactly what day it is," Morgan replied, her voice level and unhurried. She pushed the form back toward him with one finger. "I'm registered for the open division. Class A precision rifle, standard course." The man's eyebrows lifted, and he glanced past her to the row of male competitors checking their equipment at the prep tables. Several had already looked up, their conversations faltering as they noticed her standing at the counter. The registration official cleared his throat. "It's your entry fee," he finally said, processing her paperwork with deliberate slowness. Morgan paid without comment and collected her lane assignment number 17, far end of the range, where the crosswinds were strongest and the lighting most inconsistent. She recognized the subtle disadvantage but kept her expression neutral. As she turned away from the desk, adjusting the strap of her case, the competitors' area buzzed with pre-match rituals. Men in tactical pants and sponsor-laden shirts were lined up at the equipment tables, assembling custom rifles with methodical precision. They spoke in technical shorthand about grain weights and barrel harmonics, comparing optics and discussing wind calls. When Morgan approached an empty spot at the end of the preparation table, the conversation nearest her tapered into silence. She set her case down without ceremony and clicked open the latches. Inside lay her Remington 700, modified with a custom stock she'd shaped herself, stained the color of burnished copper. The barrel gleamed with a matte finish that wouldn't reflect sunlight during competition. It wasn't the most expensive setup on the line, not by far, but it was balanced perfectly for her grip and shooting style. Each component selected and adjusted over years of practice. As she began her assembly routine, methodically checking each part, a shadow fell across her workspace. Looking up, she found herself facing Dominic Keller, whose name was engraved on trophies throughout the clubhouse. His arms were crossed over his chest, a half smile playing at the corners of his mouth as he watched her work. "Saw your name on the roster," he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Thought maybe it was a mistake." Morgan continued assembling her rifle, hands moving with practiced efficiency. "No mistake," she replied, not looking up as she seated the barrel precisely. "Just another competitor." Dominic leaned closer, resting one hand on the edge of the table. "Look, I'm not trying to be a jerk here, but you should know what you're walking into. This isn't like shooting paper targets at the local range. The recoil alone from competition loads will have you flinching by the third shot. Most men can barely handle it through a full course. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." Morgan paused, finally meeting his gaze. "I appreciate the concern," she said, her voice carrying a gentle but unmistakable edge. "But I've been shooting competition loads since I was 15. I know exactly what I'm walking into." Dominic straightened, his expression shifting from condescension to something harder. Several of his friends had gathered behind him, watching the exchange with poorly concealed amusement. "It's physics," he said with a shrug. "Women don't have the upper body strength or shoulder mass to absorb that kind of repeated impact. You'll be all over the target by the halfway point." A few chuckles rippled through the small crowd. Morgan felt the weight of their attention, but didn't rush her movements as she finished, mounting her scope and checked the torque on each screw. The range officer called the 15-minute warning over the loudspeaker, and competitors began moving toward their assigned lanes. "I guess we'll see," she said simply, closing her case and picking up her assembled rifle. She walked past Dominic without further comment, her boots crunching on the gravel path that led to the firing line. Behind her, she heard someone mutter, "This ought to be entertaining," followed by more laughter. She didn't turn around. She had nothing to prove to them, only to herself and the targets waiting downrange. Lane 17 was positioned at the far end of the range, where the morning sun would cut across her field of vision during the first relay. The target stands were positioned at varied distances, starting at 300 yards and extending out to 1,000. For the final stage, Morgan set up her shooting mat and bipod, arranging her ammunition precisely within reach. Her movements were economical, focused, without a hint of the nervousness that fluttered in her chest. She had competed in regional events before, but this was her first time at nationals, where the top 20 qualifiers would advance to the championship round. The course of fire was demanding. 5 positions, 8 shots per position, with time limits that allowed little room for hesitation or adjustment. Perfect scores were rare. Consistent grouping under pressure was what separated the truly skilled from the merely competent. From the adjacent lane, a competitor in a sponsored shirt glanced over at her setup. "First time?" he asked, his tone somewhere between friendly and patronizing. "At nationals, yes," Morgan replied, adjusting her rear shooting bag. "You?" "3rd year running," he said. "Made it to the finals last year. Name's Eric." He offered his hand, which she shook briefly. "Word of advice, the wind here changes direction about every 20 minutes. Don't chase it. Find your baseline and adjust from there." Morgan nodded. "Thanks." It was actually useful advice, if delivered with an undertone that suggested she needed the help more than others. She settled behind her rifle, using the remaining minutes to study the range through her scope, noting the way the grass bent in different directions across the field, the subtle indicators of wind patterns that would affect her shots. The range officer's voice crackled over the speaker system. "Shooters to the line. Relay 1 will commence in 2 minutes." Along the firing line, 48 competitors made final adjustments to their positions. Morgan drew a slow breath, centering herself in the familiar pre-match ritual. She felt the eyes of nearby competitors sliding toward her, some curious, others dismissive. It didn't matter. When the buzzer sounded, there would be only her, the rifle, and the target. "Relay 1, you may load and make ready." Morgan seated around in the chamber, her movements deliberate and smooth. She settled her cheek against the stock, finding her natural point of aim, and exhaled slowly. "Shooters ready. Stand by." The electronic buzzer cut through the silence, and the range erupted with the first volley of shots. The report of Morgan's rifle was crisp and controlled, the recoil flowing through her body as she maintained her sight picture. She worked through her first string methodically, each shot following the same rhythm. Acquire, breathe, press, follow through, reset. When the first relay ended, the range fell silent except for the metallic sounds of reloading. Morgan's shoulders held no tension as she prepared for the next position. From the corner of her eye, she could see Dominic 2 lanes over, glancing in her direction with an expression of mild surprise. She didn't acknowledge him, focusing instead on her data book, noting the slight adjustment needed for the changing wind. By the 3rd relay, the real challenge began. The distance increased to 600 yards, where wind effects multiplied. and the slightest tremor in a shooter's position could send rounds off target. Many competitors started to fatigue, their groups opening up as concentration wavered. Morgan maintained her pace, her breathing pattern unchanged, her follow-through consistent after each shot. The range officer called a brief halt between the third and fourth relays. Competitors stood, stretching tense muscles and comparing notes on conditions. Morgan rolled her shoulders once, took a sip of water, and remained at her station. She could hear murmurs rippling through the line as scores from the first 3 relays were posted on the electronic board. She was in third place, 1 point behind Dominic and 3 behind the leader, a former military marksman from Colorado. The realization spread quickly through the competitors. Several glanced her way with newfound respect or deepening skepticism. Dominic approached her lane during the break, his expression unreadable. "Lucky wind calls," he said, though his tone lacked the earlier dismissiveness. "Let's see if you can hold it through the long course." Morgan met his gaze evenly. "Luck doesn't group inside an inch at 600 yards, she replied, her voice quiet but firm. "But thanks for the encouragement." He stared at her for a moment longer, then nodded once before returning to his station. The interaction didn't escape notice. Several competitors watched the exchange with interest, reassessing their initial judgments. The fourth relay began, and the challenge intensified. The targets now stood at 800 yards, where even the Earth's rotation became a factor in precision. Shooting. This was where experience separated the field, where intuition developed through thousands of rounds downrange could compensate for conditions that changed faster than they could be calculated. Morgan's focus narrowed to a singular point. Each breath, each heartbeat, each subtle pressure of her finger on the trigger became part of a unified action, refined through years of practice on windswept Montana ranges. When her final shot of the relay broke cleanly, she knew before checking that her group was tight. The electronic scoreboard confirmed it. She had moved into second place, now just 1 point behind the leader and 2 ahead of Dominic, whose last string had opened up slightly in the shifting winds. The competitors' area buzzed with tension as they prepared for the final relay. This would be the decisive stage 1,000 yards, where millimeters of movement at the firing line translated to feet of deviation at the target. Morgan kept her routine unchanged, checking her data, calculating her adjustments, and settling into position. With the same deliberate focus, Dominic, now at a neighboring lane, spoke without looking at her. "Don't choke now," he said, just loud enough for her to hear. "The real shooting starts at 1,000. Morgan didn't respond. She controlled her breathing, finding the rhythm that would carry her through the final 8 shots. When the buzzer sounded, she was ready. The first shot broke cleanly, the satisfying impact visible through her scope a fraction of a second later. She worked through her string with methodical precision, reading the subtle changes in mirage that indicated wind shifts too slight for flags to register. Each round found its mark within the innermost scoring ring. Around her, the sound of firing gradually diminished as competitors completed their final strings. Morgan's last shot broke with the same controlled pressure as her first, the rifle settling back into position as she followed through. Silence fell over the range. The scoring system processed the final results, and tension built as competitors waited for the official standings. Morgan remained behind her rifle, completing her post-shooting checklist without rushing. Only when she had cleared her weapon and stowed it properly did she stand to face the scoreboard. The results appeared, and a murmur rippled through the assembled shooters. Morgan Reed, 396 out of 400 possible points. First place, 2 points ahead of the former military marksman, and 5 ahead of Dominic Keller. A small crowd gathered around the scoring table, competitors examining the targets in disbelief. Morgan's final string at 1,000 yards showed 8 shots grouped inside an area smaller than a playing card. a feat rarely achieved even by the most seasoned shooters. The range officer approached with the official scorecard, offering a handshake that conveyed genuine respect. "That's the tightest 1,000-yard group I've seen in 3 years of running this qualifier," he said. "You're headed to the championship bracket." Morgan signed the card, acknowledging the score with a slight nod. "Thank you," she said simply. As she turned to leave, she found Dominic standing nearby, his expression a complex mixture of frustration and reluctant admiration. "I've never seen anyone shoot that well under pressure," he admitted, extending his hand. "Especially not on their first nationals." Morgan accepted the handshake, her grip firm. "It's not about gender," she said quietly. "It's about fundamentals and discipline. The rifle doesn't care who's behind it." He nodded slowly, a realization settling behind his eyes. "I underestimated you. Won't make that mistake again." "Good," she replied. "Because I'll be back next year." As Morgan packed her equipment, other competitors approached, offering congratulations or asking technical questions about her setup and techniques. The earlier dismissiveness had vanished, replaced by professional curiosity and respect earned through undeniable performance. She answered their questions directly, neither boasting about her achievement nor diminishing it with false modesty. When asked how she managed the recoil so effectively through 40 rounds of competition ammunition, she explained her technique of proper alignment and weight distribution rather than relying on brute strength. "It's not about fighting the rifle," she told a group of attentive listeners. "It's about becoming part of the system. The recoil is just energy transfer. You direct it, not absorb it." The sun was setting over the range as Morgan carried her case toward the parking area. The day's competition had reshaped perceptions, not through arguments or demands for recognition, but through the incontrovertible evidence of performance. She had entered as an oddity and would leave as a competitor to be reckoned with. As she loaded her equipment into her truck, she noticed a young girl watching from nearby, clutching her father's hand. The girl, no more than 12, stared at Morgan with undisguised admiration. "Are you the lady who won today?" the girl asked when Morgan looked her way. Morgan nodded, closing the truck's tailgate. "I am. Dad says girls don't usually shoot in the big competitions," the girl said, her voice a mixture of confusion and hope. Morgan knelt to eye level with the child. "They didn't used to," she replied, "but that's changing. If you love something and work hard at it, don't let anyone tell you it's not for you." The girl's face brightened. "I want to try shooting. Dad promised to teach me." "Good," Morgan said with a smile. "Start with the fundamentals and practice them until they're second nature. The rest will come." As she drove away from Blackwater Ridge, Morgan reflected on the day's significance. She hadn't entered the competition to make a statement or break barriers. She had come because marksmanship was her passion and excellence was her standard. Yet in pursuing her own goals, she had perhaps opened a door for others to follow. Tomorrow would bring the championship round and stronger competition. There would be new challenges, new doubters, new opportunities to excel. But for now, she savored the quiet satisfaction of a performance that spoke for itself, louder and more convincingly than any words could have. The trophy wasn't the point. The recognition wasn't the goal. The real victory lay in the moment when skill transcended expectation, when performance rendered prejudice irrelevant, when excellence became the only statement needed. As the landscape rolled past her window, Morgan allowed herself a small smile. This was just the beginning. The championship course loomed ahead of Morgan Reed like a gauntlet designed to expose any weakness in technique or resolve. The morning sun cast long shadows across the upgraded range, where advanced electronic targets displayed real-time hit data and wind flags snapped in the capricious breeze. This was where the nation's top 20 qualifiers would face a course of fire twice as demanding as yesterday's, with international scoring rings, moving targets, and stress positions that would test the limits of human precision. Before we Jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Morgan arrived 90 minutes before the official start time, her truck pulling into a parking lot already half filled with competitors' vehicles. The championship bracket attracted a different caliber of shooter, not just weekend enthusiasts with quality equipment, but professionals whose names were known throughout the precision shooting world. Former military snipers, Olympic medalists, and sponsored athletes whose livelihoods depended on their ability to place shots exactly where intended, regardless of conditions. She collected her credential packet from the registration table, where the same official from yesterday greeted her with newfound respect. "Lane assignment is inside," he said, his tone professional rather than doubtful. "They've already got media setting up. Your performance yesterday got their attention." Morgan thanked him with a nod and scanned the paperwork. Lane 12, middle of the line, a neutral position without the disadvantages she'd been assigned in the qualifier. She made her way to the competitors' staging area, a large tent with individual stations for equipment preparation. The atmosphere inside was different from the previous day, less bravado, more focused intensity as shooters calibrated their equipment with silent precision. Dominic was already there, methodically cleaning his bolt assembly at a station near the center. He looked up as she entered, offering a brief nod of acknowledgement. Several other competitors followed his gaze, their expressions varying from curiosity to calculation. Word of her qualifier performance had spread, and with it, a reassessment of the competitive field. Morgan selected an empty station and began her preparation routine. She unpacked her rifle, inspecting each component with deliberate care, checking tolerances and connections that could affect accuracy. Her fingers moved with practiced efficiency, muscle memory built through thousands of repetitions. Nothing was left to chance. Nothing was assumed to be perfect without verification. "Read, right?" A woman's voice interrupted her concentration. Morgan looked up to find Catherine Westfield standing beside her station. Westfield was a legend in precision shooting, a 3-time national champion whose expertise had helped develop some of the most advanced marksmanship training programs in the country. Her presence at Morgan's station drew subtle attention from nearby competitors. "That's right," Morgan replied, continuing her preparation. "Your qualifier score was impressive," Westfield said, her experienced eyes assessing Morgan's equipment. "Especially for someone nobody's heard of before. Where did you train?" Morgan seated her barrel with a precise quarter turn. "Mostly self-taught. My grandfather got me started when I was 12. I've been competing regionally in Montana and Wyoming for about 5 years." Westfield raised an eyebrow. "Self-taught to shoot sub-OA groups at 1,000 yards? That's not something you hear every day." "I had good fundamentals to build on," Morgan explained. "And I practice a lot." "Well," Westfield said with a knowing smile, "welcome to the national stage. It's about time we had some new blood in the top brackets." She glanced toward where Dominic and several other male competitors were watching their interaction. "Some of these guys have been getting comfortable. A little disruption is healthy for the sport." With that, she returned to her own station, leaving Morgan aware of the subtle shift her presence had created. She wasn't just an anomaly anymore. She was a legitimate contender who had caught the attention of the sports elite. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The range officer's announcement cut through the preparation area. Competitors briefing. In 15 minutes, all shooters to the classroom. Morgan secured her rifle and followed the flow of competitors toward a large room adjacent to the range. Inside, presentation screens displayed the championship course of Fire a Sequence of challenges designed to test every aspect of marksmanship under pressure. The head judge, a former military precision instructor with salt and pepper hair and weathered features, waited until all 20 qualifiers were seated before beginning. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen every possible mistake a shooter could make, "welcome to the National Championship. What you're about to face is the most demanding course in competitive precision shooting. 8 stages, each with unique challenges that will test not just your ability to break shots, but your capacity to adapt, problem solve, and perform under escalating pressure." The screens behind him cycled through diagrams of the various stages: traditional prone positions at extreme distances, seated positions with unstable supports, timed engagements requiring rapid transitions between multiple targets, and stress positions that would fatigue muscles and challenge breathing control. "The scoring is ruthless," he continued. "International rings with timing penalties for exceeding stage limits. You'll be ranked after each stage, and the bottom 5 competitors will be eliminated after stage 4. From there, we'll cut by 3, then 2, until only the top 5 advance to the final stage." Morgan studied the course details mentally, rehearsing each position, calculating adjustments for the various distances and angles. This wasn't just about shooting skill anymore. It was about strategic thinking, resource management, and psychological resilience. "One final note," the head judge said, his gaze sweeping across the room. "This is the first time in 7 years we've had a perfect distribution of the top 20 slots from the qualifier. No ties, no score adjustments. You've all earned your place here on merit alone. I expect to see that same level of excellence on the course today." As the briefing concluded, competitors filed out toward the range, where the first stage was being prepared. Morgan could feel the energy shifting from anticipation to focused determination. These were the moments that separated casual enthusiasts from dedicated professionals, when theoretical knowledge transformed into applied performance under the harshest scrutiny. Stage 1 was deceptively straightforward: prone position, 1,000 yards, 10 shots in 10 minutes. The seeming simplicity masked the true challenge. The targets featured international scoring, rings that reduced the margin for error by nearly 50% compared to standard competition targets. A shot that would score perfectly in a qualifier might only earn 8 points here. Morgan settled into position behind her rifle, establishing her natural point of aim with methodical precision. The range officer called the ready commands, and at the signal, 20 of the country's finest marksmen began their first string of fire. The crack of high-powered rifles filled the air in an irregular rhythm, each competitor working at their own pace. Morgan established her breathing pattern, synchronizing her trigger press with the natural respiratory pause that provided maximum stability. Her first shot broke cleanly, and through her scope, she confirmed a perfect center hit. 9 more followed in sequence, each receiving the same deliberate attention. When the ceasefire was called, Morgan knew before checking the electronic scoreboard that her performance had been solid, not perfect, but well within the upper echelon. The scores confirmed it. She was in 4th place after stage 1-2. Points behind the leader, a former military marksman named Taylor, and 1 point behind Dominic and Westfield, who were tied for 2nd. The competition had only begun, but the hierarchy was already establishing itself. Stage 2 introduced the first significant challenge: seated position with a time constraint of 8 minutes for 8 shots at 800 yards. The seated position reduced stability compared to prone, forcing competitors to rely more heavily on muscle control and consistent bone support. Morgan settled onto the small stool provided, arranging her support bag on the bench in front of her. The position felt familiar from countless practice sessions on her grandfather's property, where she'd learned to adapt to unconventional shooting positions. When the buzzer sounded, she established her rhythm quickly, working through her string with efficient precision. The time pressure didn't affect her process. Each shot received its due attention, each trigger press executed with the same controlled pressure. As scores were posted, a murmur passed through the competitors and spectators. Morgan had moved into second place overall, her Stage 2 performance surpassing all but Westfield, whose decades of experience showed in her consistent execution. Dominic, now in third, approached Morgan as they moved toward the preparation area for Stage 3. "You're shooting clean," he observed, his tone respectful. "But the real test comes next. Stress positions separate the field every year." Morgan nodded her acknowledgement. "We'll see," she replied, neither dismissive nor overconfident. Stage 3 presented a scenario that few recreational shooters ever mastered: kneeling position, supported only by a single trekking pole, engaging targets at varied distances from 600 to 900 yards. The position strained knee joints and back muscles, making each shot progressively more difficult as fatigue accumulated. Morgan settled into the awkward stance, finding her balance point and establishing a stable connection between her body and the rifle. The discomfort was immediate but manageable. She had trained for this, spending hours in similar positions until her muscles adapted to the unusual demands. The first shots from around the line revealed the challenge's impact. Even experienced competitors struggled with the position, their groups opening up as muscles trembled under sustained stress. Morgan focused on her process, controlling her breathing more deliberately to compensate for the increased physical strain. When she completed her string, she felt the familiar burn in her quadriceps and lower back, the cost of maintaining position. Integrity throughout the stage. But her performance had paid off. The electronic scoreboard showed her in first place overall, 2 points ahead of Westfield and 4 ahead of Dominic, who had dropped to fourth behind Taylor. The shift in standing sent a ripple through the spectator area, where a small crowd had gathered to watch the country's top shooters compete. Camera crews from shooting sports networks adjusted their positions, focusing more attention on the unknown competitor from Montana, who was outperforming established champions. Stage 4 would be the first elimination point, after which 5 competitors would be cut from the field. The pressure intensified as they faced a simulation of real-world precision shooting, a barricade position requiring shooters to support their rifles on an unstable surface while engaging targets that appeared for only 15 seconds each. Morgan approached the wooden barricade, analyzing its structure and identifying the most stable contact points for her rifle. She adjusted her support bag, creating a platform that would minimize movement when she pressed the rifle into position. The stage began, and targets illuminated downrange in an unpredictable sequence. Morgan tracked each appearance, establishing position, acquiring sight picture, and breaking shots with fluid efficiency. Where others rushed to beat the disappearing targets, she maintained her process, sacrificing speed for precision when necessary. When the final scores were calculated, Morgan remained in first place, though her lead had narrowed to a single point over Westfield. Dominic had climbed back to third, while Taylor dropped to sixth. 5 competitors were eliminated, their championship run ended by the unforgiving demands of the barricade stage. The 15 remaining shooters moved to the preparation area for a brief rest before Stage 5. Morgan rolled her shoulders and stretched her back, releasing tension that had accumulated through the demanding positions. She sipped water methodically, maintaining hydration without overloading her system. Dominic approached again, his expression more serious than before. "You're shooting better than anyone I've seen in 3 years of nationals," he said quietly. "But Westfield won't go down easily. She always pushes hardest in the final stages." Morgan met his gaze. "I'm not trying to beat anyone specific," she replied. "I'm just shooting my own match." He nodded slowly. "That's probably why you're winning," he acknowledged. "Most people get caught up competing against names instead of focusing on their own performance." As he walked away, Morgan noticed several competitors watching their interaction with interest. The dynamics had shifted dramatically since yesterday's qualifier. She was no longer an outsider to be dismissed, she was the front-runner being studied for any sign of weakness or tactical advantage. Stage 5 introduced a new dimension of difficulty: moving targets, traveling at varying speeds across the range at 700 yards. Competitors would need to calculate lead based on target velocity, adjusting their hold-off points while maintaining fundamentals under time pressure. Morgan had prepared for this challenge through unconventional training, using a pendulum target system she'd built on her grandfather's property, learning to time her shots to intercept moving objects with mathematical precision. As the targets began their traverse across the range, she settled into the familiar calculations, her mind processing distance, velocity, and wind in a seamless integration. The results spoke for themselves, while other competitors struggled. With the unfamiliar challenge, Morgan's performance remained consistent. She maintained her overall lead, though Westfield stayed within striking distance, just 2 points behind. Dominic held third position, while 3 more competitors were eliminated, narrowing the field to 12. Tension built as they approached Stage 6, a test of endurance and psychological resilience. Competitors would shoot from the prone position. Again, but with a cruel twist, they would be required to hold a weighted bar at arm's length between shot sequences, inducing muscle fatigue that would destabilize their platform. As Morgan settled into position with the 15-pound bar beside her, she focused on controlling her breathing, conserving energy between lifts, and managing the tremors that would inevitably develop. When the stage began, she executed her strategy. With disciplined precision, complete shot process, lift weight, hold for required time, return to position, resettle, repeat. The physical challenge took its toll on every competitor. Groups widened as muscles fatigued, and mental discipline wavered under the strain. Morgan felt the burn in her shoulders and arms, but maintained her rhythm through all 10 shots, refusing to rush or compromise fundamentals despite the growing discomfort. When scores were posted, gasps rippled through the spectator area. Morgan had not only maintained her lead, but extended it to 5 points over Westfield. Dominic had slipped to fourth, overtaken by a former Olympic shooter who excelled in physical endurance tests. 3 more competitors were eliminated, leaving 9 to contest the remaining stages. Stage 7 would narrow the field to the final 5 who would compete for the championship title. The challenge was perhaps the most daunting yet. Competitors would engage targets at extreme distances, 1,200 yards, while dealing with a shifting wind pattern created by industrial fans positioned at intervals along the range. This was where theory met application, where understanding the physics of external ballistics became critical to success. Morgan studied the wind indicators intently during the preparation period, noting the patterns in flag movement and mirage distortion that revealed the invisible currents affecting bullet trajectory. When her turn came, she approached each shot as a unique problem to solve, reading conditions moment by moment rather than relying on previous wind calls. Her first shot landed slightly off-center, a 9 rather than a 10, but she processed the feedback immediately, adjusting her hold for the next attempt. The adaptability paid off. While other competitors struggled with the unpredictable conditions, Morgan's performance remained consistent through the string. When final scores were calculated, she maintained her overall lead, though Westfield had closed the gap to 3 points with an exceptional performance of her own. Dominic reclaimed third position, joining Morgan, Westfield, Taylor, and the Olympic shooter in the final 5 who would compete for the championship. The elimination of 4 more competitors heightened the tension as they prepared for the decisive 8th stage. The head judge gathered the finalists for a briefing on the championship challenge. This final stage tests everything: physical endurance, mental discipline, adaptability, and pure shooting skill, he explained. You'll begin prone at 600 yards, fire 3 shots. Then move immediately to a kneeling barricade at 700 yards for 3 more. From there, you'll transition to a seated position at 800 yards, then finish with 3 shots from the prone at 1,000 yards. The complexity was daunting: 4 positions, 4 distances, 12 total shots with only 15 minutes to complete the entire sequence, including transitions between firing points. Equipment would need to be carried between positions, and adjustments made on the fly for changing distances and conditions. As the finalists prepared their equipment, Morgan felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find Westfield standing beside her, an expression of professional respect on her weathered face. "Whatever happens out there," the veteran shooter said quietly, "you've already made your point. This sport needs more competitors like you, people who let their performance do the talking." Morgan nodded her appreciation for the gesture. "Thanks," she replied. "But I didn't come this far to make a point. I came to win." Westfield smiled. "That's exactly why you belong here," she said, before returning to her own preparation. The final stage would be shot one competitor at a time, with cumulative scores from previous stages carrying forward. As the 5th-ranked finalist, Dominic would shoot first, followed by Taylor, the Olympic shooter, Westfield, and finally Morgan. The spectator area had swelled as word spread about the championship battle and the unexpected leader. Camera crews positioned themselves for better angles, and a hushed anticipation settled over the range as Dominic stepped to the first position. His performance was impressive: smooth transitions between positions, solid fundamentals throughout, and only one shot outside the center ring. When he finished, his combined score set a high benchmark for the remaining competitors. Taylor and the Olympic shooter followed with comparable performances, though neither managed to surpass Dominic's total. The competition had narrowed to 3 legitimate contenders for the title. Westfield approached the course with the confidence of someone who had faced this challenge multiple times before. Her execution was nearly flawless: efficient movement between positions, precise adjustments for each distance, and consistency that reflected decades of high-level competition. When she finished, her total score had surpassed Dominic's by 2 points, putting her in provisional first place with only Morgan left to shoot. A hush fell over the range as Morgan stepped to the first firing point. The lead she had built through 7 stages gave her a 3-point advantage over Westfield's cumulative score, but the final stage would determine everything. One significant error could erase her entire margin. Morgan settled into the prone position, establishing her natural point of aim with deliberate precision. The first 3 shots broke cleanly, all finding the center ring at 600 yards. She transitioned smoothly to the kneeling barricade, moving with controlled urgency that wasted no motion or energy. At the barricade, she established her position quickly but thoroughly, refusing to rush the fundamental setup that would determine shot quality. Her 3 shots grouped tightly in the center ring, maintaining her perfect run through the stage. The seated position at 800 yards presented the first real challenge. As she settled onto the small stool, a gust of wind swept across the range, stronger than any previous breeze that day. Morgan read the condition, calculating the adjustment needed to compensate for the sudden change. Her first shot landed slightly off-center, a 9 instead of a 10. She processed the feedback immediately, recalculated her wind hold, and placed the next 2 shots perfectly central. The minor deduction had reduced her margin, but she remained ahead as she moved to the final position. The 1,000-yard prone would decide the championship. Morgan established her position with the same methodical precision she had demonstrated throughout the competition. Her breathing settled into its familiar rhythm, her focus narrowing to the perfect alignment of body, rifle, and target. The first shot broke cleanly, striking center. The second followed with equal precision. With 1 shot remaining and her lead intact, Morgan could have played it safe, accepting a slightly wider margin of error to ensure a hit inside the scoring ring. Instead, she approached the final shot with the same exacting standard she had applied to every round fired that day. Perfect position, perfect breath control, perfect trigger press. The shot broke, and through her scope, Morgan confirmed what she already knew: a perfect center hit to complete her championship performance. The range erupted in applause as the final scores appeared on the electronic board. Morgan Reed, national champion, with a 2-point margin over Catherine Westfield and 7 points ahead of Dominic Keller. As she stood from the firing line, competitors and spectators approached with congratulations and questions about her technique and training. Media representatives requested interviews, and equipment manufacturers expressed interest in potential sponsorship discussions. Through it all, Morgan maintained the same composed demeanor that had characterized her entire performance. She acknowledged the recognition with quiet gratitude, answered technical questions directly, and deflected attempts to frame her victory as anything other than the result of disciplined practice and fundamental execution. Dominic approached. As the crowd began to disperse, extending his hand with genuine respect. "I've never been so thoroughly proven wrong," he admitted. "What you did out there wasn't just good shooting, it was a masterclass in precision under pressure." Morgan accepted his handshake. "Everyone has something to learn," she replied. "Even those of us who've been doing this for years." As the championship ceremony concluded and competitors packed their equipment, Morgan found herself approached by a group of young women who had watched the final stage from the spectator area. They ranged in age from teenagers to early 20s, all clearly inspired by what they had witnessed. "We've never seen anyone shoot like that," one of them said, eyes bright with admiration. "Would you consider hosting a clinic sometime? We've been trying to get more women involved in precision shooting, but it's hard without visible role models." Morgan looked at their eager faces and felt something shift in her perspective. What had begun as a personal challenge, a test of her own abilities against the best in the country, had unexpectedly become something more. In pursuing excellence for its own sake, she had opened a door for others to follow. "Yes," she said with a smile that reached her eyes for the first time that day. "I think I would like that very much." 6 months after claiming the national championship, Morgan Reed stood behind a line of 15 women at Whispering Pines Shooting Complex, her voice carrying clearly across the Montana morning. "Precision isn't about strength," she explained, moving between positions to adjust stances and offer guidance. "It's about alignment, consistency, and understanding the relationship between your body and your rifle." The women listened intently, absorbing every word from the shooter who had shattered expectations and rewritten what was possible in competitive marksmanship. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." The Women's Precision Shooting Clinic had begun as a small idea, a weekend workshop for those interested in learning the fundamentals. When registration opened, the available spots filled within hours, with a waiting list quickly growing to 3 times the initial capacity. Morgan had been surprised by the response, but recognized the hunger for instruction that addressed the specific challenges women faced in the sport, historically dominated by men. "The rifle doesn't know who's holding it," she often repeated during training sessions. "It responds to physics and input. Your job is to provide consistent input regardless of conditions." Today's group included a diverse range of participants: college students interested in competitive shooting, hunters looking to extend their effective range, military veterans maintaining skills, and professionals seeking a challenging hobby. What united them was the desire to learn from someone who had proven that excellence transcended traditional expectations. "Let's talk about recoil management," Morgan said, picking up a demonstration rifle from the rack beside her. "There's a persistent myth that women can't handle the recoil of precision calibers. That's not just wrong, it fundamentally misunderstands how recoil works." She settled into a prone position on the demonstration mat, rifle positioned with textbook form. "Recoil isn't something you absorb with muscle mass. It's energy you redirect through proper alignment. Your body is a system, not a wall. The force follows the path you create." Morgan demonstrated the technique in slow motion, showing how proper positioning distributed recoil energy through the skeletal structure rather than relying on upper body strength to absorb impact. This is why a 100-pound shooter with perfect form can manage recoil better than a 200-pound shooter with flawed alignment. The participants watched intently, many taking notes or recording the demonstration on their phones. Among them was Elise Carter, a 22-year-old engineering student whose questions throughout the morning had revealed both technical aptitude and genuine curiosity. "What about the psychological aspect?" Elise asked. "How do you handle the anticipation of recoil without flinching, especially during those first few experiences with higher calibers?" Morgan nodded appreciatively at the insightful question. "That's exactly the right thing to ask," she replied. "The physical technique matters, but the mental approach is just as important. Flinching happens when your brain tries to protect you from something it perceives as harmful. The key is gradual exposure combined with perfect position. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She explained her progression method, starting with lower recoil rounds to establish perfect form, then gradually introducing full power loads once the fundamentals became instinctive. Your body learns that properly managed recoil isn't a threat. The flinch response diminishes when your subconscious recognizes the pattern of controlled energy transfer. The morning session continued with practical exercises, each participant receiving individualized attention as Morgan identified and corrected subtle issues in their form. By lunchtime, every woman had successfully engaged targets at 200 yards, many grouping shots with impressive consistency for beginners. As they broke for lunch under a pavilion near the range, conversation flowed naturally between participants who had arrived as strangers but were quickly bonding over shared experiences and challenges. Morgan sat with them, answering questions about her journey and offering insights into the competitive shooting world. "How did you handle the pushback?" asked Melissa, a former military police officer transitioning to civilian life. "When people dismissed you or suggested you didn't belong?" Morgan considered the question carefully. "I focused on what I could control: my preparation, my execution, my response to conditions. Opinions aren't performance metrics. They don't affect bullet trajectory." She took a sip of water before continuing. "That doesn't mean it was easy. There were plenty of moments when I questioned whether I was fighting an uphill battle that wasn't worth the effort. What kept me going was knowing that my grandfather believed in me, not because I was his granddaughter, but because he saw something genuine in my approach to marksmanship." The afternoon session shifted focus to environmental reading, understanding wind, mirage, and atmospheric conditions that affected long-range accuracy. Morgan set up demonstration stations along the firing line, each showcasing different techniques for gathering and interpreting data. "Wind is the single most challenging variable in precision shooting," she explained, pointing to the subtly bending grass across the range. "It's invisible, constantly changing, and affects your bullet differently across the flight path. Learning to read wind is where science meets intuition." She demonstrated practical field methods for wind estimation, watching vegetation movement, tracking mirage drift through spotting scopes, and using environmental indicators to build a comprehensive picture of conditions. Rather than focusing on complex formulas, she emphasized pattern recognition and practical application. "Theory matters," Morgan acknowledged, "but under match pressure, you need systems that work for your specific thought process. Some shooters do best with mathematical wind calling. Others rely on visual references. Find what works for your brain under stress, then practice until it becomes second nature." As the day progressed, the women rotated through practical exercises at increasing distances. Morgan moved constantly between shooting positions, offering guidance and making small adjustments, that yielded immediate improvements in performance. By mid-afternoon, even the most inexperienced participants were consistently hitting targets at ranges that would have seemed impossible hours earlier. During a short break, Morgan noticed Elise sitting alone, studying the ballistic chart she'd created during the wind reading exercise. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, clearly working through a concept that hadn't fully clicked. "Something troubling you?" Morgan asked, sitting beside her. Elise looked up, slightly embarrassed. "I understand the theory of wind calling, but I'm struggling to apply it consistently. By the time I process all the variables, conditions have changed, and I'm chasing corrections instead of predicting impact." Morgan nodded in understanding. "You're approaching it like an engineering problem, trying to account for every variable with perfect precision. That works in some disciplines, but wind reading requires a different mindset." She pulled out her notebook, the same one she'd carried throughout her competitive career, and opened to a page filled with simple diagrams. "I developed this system when I was struggling with the same challenge. Instead of treating wind as a complex equation, I visualize it as zones of influence." The diagram showed a simplified range divided into sections, each with relative importance rather than specific values. Near zone affects initial stability. Mid-zone determines most of your drift. Far zone influences final impact point. By prioritizing your attention on the mid-zone, you make better calls with less mental processing. Elise studied the system, her expression clearing as the concept took hold. "So instead of trying to calculate exact values across the entire range, you're making weighted judgments based on where wind matters most for that specific shot." "Exactly," Morgan confirmed. "It's about practical effectiveness, not theoretical perfection. The best wind call is the one you can make confidently under time pressure." The insight seemed to resonate not just with Elise, but with several other participants who had gathered nearby to listen. Morgan recognized the moment as an opportunity to address a broader principle that extended beyond technical skills. "Precision shooting has valuable lessons that apply well beyond the range," she told the group. "It teaches you to identify what truly matters in complex situations, to make decisions with incomplete information, and to take full responsibility for your actions. Every shot is a microcosm of effective decision-making under pressure." As the afternoon session concluded, Morgan gathered the participants for a final challenge, a friendly competition, engaging targets at varying distances with changing wind conditions. Rather than focusing solely on scores, she emphasized process, quality, and decision-making. "I'm not looking for perfect shots," she explained. "I'm looking for perfect application of what you've learned today. Show me good position, thoughtful wind reading, and consistent follow-through." She had entered the shooting sports seeking personal excellence. Now she found herself building a community where others could discover their own potential. Melissa approached as Morgan was collecting the target stands. "I wanted to thank you," she said. "Not just for the technical instruction, which was excellent, but for showing what's possible. I've been hesitant to pursue competitive shooting because I wasn't sure there was a place for someone like me. There's always a place for excellence." Morgan replied, "The sport is evolving, but it still needs people willing to challenge assumptions through performance rather than argument." As the range cleared and the Montana sunset painted the landscape in amber and gold, Morgan remained behind, making notes for future clinics and reflecting on the day's successes and areas for improvement. The sound of approaching footsteps drew her attention to a familiar figure walking across the range. Dominic Keller, still in travel clothes and carrying a compact rifle case, offered a smile of greeting. "Heard you were running a clinic," he sighed. "Thought I might stop by on my way to the regional match in Bozeman." Morgan closed her notebook. "You missed it by about an hour. We just wrapped up." "Intentional timing," he admitted. "Didn't want to interfere with your session." "How did it go?" "Better than expected," she replied. 15 participants, all making significant progress, several with real potential for competitive development. Dominic nodded, his expression thoughtful. Word's getting around about your teaching approach. The forums are buzzing with recommendations. He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. That's actually part of why I stopped by. I have a proposition for you. Morgan raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to continue. I've been talking with the National Training Committee, he explained. We're launching a development program focused on expanding participation in precision shooting. The goal is to create pathways for underrepresented groups to enter competitive marksmanship. He set his rifle case down, leaning against a bench. They're looking for instructors who can both demonstrate elite performance and effectively teach fundamentals to beginners. Your name came up repeatedly. Morgan considered this unexpected development. 6 months ago, many on that committee had barely acknowledged her presence at the championship. Now they were seeking her expertise. The irony wasn't lost on her. What exactly would this involve? She asked. Regional clinics similar to what you did today, but with institutional support and resources, Dominic explained. Curriculum development for standardized training programs. Potentially some demonstration shooting at major events. The committee wants to formalize what you're already doing and scale it nationally. He hesitated briefly before adding, for what it's worth, I strongly endorsed your name when it was proposed. What you did at Nationals changed a lot of perspectives, mine included. Morgan looked out across the range where, hours earlier, 15 women had discovered capabilities many hadn't known they possessed. The satisfaction of that experience outweighed any lingering resentment toward the institutions that had initially dismissed her. I'm interested, she said finally, but I want to maintain some autonomy in how the training is structured. My methods aren't always conventional, Dominic smiled. That's exactly why they want you. Conventional approaches haven't exactly succeeded in broadening the sport's demographic base. He reached into his pocket and produced a business card. The program director's contact information. She's eager to discuss details when you're ready. As he turned to leave, he paused. One more thing. The national team trials are next month. The committee mentioned you haven't submitted an application yet. Morgan had been considering the trials but hadn't committed to the intensive training schedule required. International competition represented a significant escalation in both commitment and visibility. Still deciding, she replied. Dominic nodded in understanding. Well, if you do decide to go for it, you should know that your championship performance already has the international coaches talking. The U.S. hasn't medaled in precision rifle at Worlds in over a decade. They think you might change that. After he departed, Morgan remained at the range as twilight settled over the landscape. The proposition represented a crossroads, an opportunity to influence the sport's future direction, while simultaneously pursuing higher competitive achievements. It wasn't a path she had envisioned when she first picked up her rifle on her grandfather's property, but it offered the chance to create meaningful change. She opened her notebook to a fresh page and began outlining ideas for a comprehensive training program, one that would address not just technical skills, but the broader challenges faced by newcomers to precision shooting. The work energized her, possibilities unfolding with each note she made. By the time she packed her equipment and locked the range gate, Morgan had made her decision. She would accept the committee's offer, but on terms that allowed her to remain authentic to her approach. And she would submit her application for the national team trials, not because she needed external validation, but because the international stage offered a platform to demonstrate what was possible when talent was recognized, regardless of preconceptions. The headlights of her truck illuminated the winding road home, cutting through the Montana darkness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: curriculum planning, training schedules, preparation for team trials. But tonight, she carried the satisfaction of knowing that 15 women had left her range with new capabilities and confidence that extended beyond marksmanship. In that, she had discovered a purpose larger than individual achievement. Excellence remained her standard, but now it served as both personal goal and pathway for others. The barriers she had faced weren't unique to her experience. By systematically dismantling them through performance and instruction, she created opportunities that would outlast any championship title. The notebook beside her contained more than technical notes and ballistic data. It held the blueprint for evolution both of a sport and the diverse community it could serve. Morgan drove homeward with clear purpose, the road ahead illuminated not just by headlights but by the vision of what precision shooting could become when talent was recognized in all its forms. The journey had begun with a single defiant statement: "I can fly it." It continued with quiet determination and undeniable performance. Now it expanded to include others whose potential had been similarly overlooked. The foundation was in place. The structure would rise shot by shot, student by student, mind by mind, a legacy more enduring than any trophy could represent. As the stars emerged across the Montana sky, Morgan felt a profound connection to both past and future, honoring the grandfather who had first placed a rifle in her hands while creating pathways for those who would follow. Excellence wasn't just a personal standard. It was a torch to be passed forward, illuminating possibilities previously hidden in shadow. The road home wound through familiar landscape, but Morgan's perspective had transformed. What had begun as a personal journey of validation had evolved into something far more significant, a movement toward inclusion, based not on accommodation but on the universal language of performance. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight she drove toward home with quiet certainty that her most important shots were yet to be fired, her most significant impact yet to be made. The trajectory was clear, the target defined, and her determination, like her aim, remained unwavering. The stillness of pre-dawn settled over the International Shooting Complex, broken only by the soft footfalls of Morgan Reed as she made her way toward the practice range. The World Championship would officially begin in 3 days, but Morgan had developed a ritual of arriving early to familiarize herself with each new venue, studying the terrain, noting how light played across the targets at different hours, feeling the patterns of wind as they developed through the morning. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 2 years had passed since her unexpected national championship victory. In that time, she had transformed from an unknown outsider to a central figure in precision shooting's evolution. The development program she helped create had expanded to 12 regional centers across the country, each offering structured pathways for newcomers to the sport. Participation by women had increased 63%, a statistic that gave Morgan more satisfaction than her growing collection of medals and trophies. Now she stood at the threshold of the sport's most prestigious competition, representing the United States on a world stage that few American shooters had successfully conquered in recent decades. The pressure was immense, but Morgan had developed systems for managing expectation, both external and internal. Pressure was just another variable to be calculated, understood, and incorporated into her process. She set up her equipment at an empty firing point, methodically arranging her support bags, data book, and environmental tools. The rifle now bearing the subtle logos of technical sponsors who valued her precision rather than her marketability came out of its case last, each component inspected before assembly, despite having been checked the previous evening. Morgan's pre-dawn practice sessions had become legendary among competitive shooters. While most preferred to rest before major events, she found clarity in these quiet hours when the range belonged only to her and perhaps a few groundskeepers preparing for the day ahead. In solitude, she could hear the subtle voice of intuition that often became obscured amid the noise of competition. "Thought I might find you here," came a familiar voice from behind her. Morgan turned to find Catherine Westfield approaching, her own equipment case in hand. The veteran shooter had become both mentor and friend over the intervening years, their initial competitive respect evolving into a relationship that benefited them, both Westfield sharing decades of international experience, Morgan offering fresh perspectives on technique and training methodology. Old habits, Morgan acknowledged with a small smile. I like to feel the range wake up. Smart approach, Westfield replied, setting up her equipment at an adjacent position. This place changes character completely once the crowds arrive. The wind patterns shift with all the bodies and movement. They worked in companionable silence, each following their individual preparation routines. As the first hints of sunrise painted the eastern sky, Morgan began her initial shots, not focusing on score, but on reading the subtle feedback from each round's impact. How did the bullet react to the morning air density? How consistent was the ammunition batch in these specific conditions? What subtle refinements might be needed in her position to accommodate the unfamiliar firing line surface? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Westfield watched with professional interest as Morgan's shots grouped tightly at the center target. Your position looks even more stable than at Nationals last month, she observed. Did you make an adjustment to your rear bag? Morgan nodded. Minor change to the fill density. Gives me better contact consistency through the recoil cycle. This was how they communicated: direct, technical, focused on the microscopic refinements that separated good performance from greatness. Neither needed nor wanted empty encouragement. Both understood that at this level, honesty served progress better than politeness. As the sun cleared the horizon, other members of various national teams began arriving for their practice sessions. The range gradually filled with the world's elite precision shooters, European champions whose names were spoken with reverence, Asian competitors known for their meticulous technical approach, veterans of Olympic and military competition whose experience spanned decades. Morgan continued her systematic practice, methodically working through different firing positions and distances. She didn't hurry her shots or allow the growing activity around her to disrupt her rhythm. Each round received full attention. Each result was recorded with scientific precision in her data book. A group of journalists had gathered near the administration building, cameras and microphones at the ready as national teams arrived for credential processing. When Morgan finally packed her equipment after completing her practice session, several media representatives approached, seeking pre-competition interviews and photographs. She engaged politely but briefly, having learned to balance promotional responsibilities with performance preparation. Yes, she was honored to represent the United States. Yes, the competition field was exceptionally strong this year. No, she wasn't focused on breaking records, only on executing her process shot by shot. As she made her way toward the team area, Morgan noticed a small group of young women watching from behind the spectator barrier. They wore the volunteer staff shirts of the host country, but were clearly focused on her rather than their assigned duties. When she glanced their way, one gathered the courage to speak. Ms. Reed? The young woman called, her English carefully practiced. We watched your training videos. Because of you, our university started women's precision shooting team last year. Morgan approached the barrier, genuinely touched by the unexpected connection. That's wonderful, she replied. How is your team developing? The question opened a flurry of enthusiastic responses. They showed her photos on a smartphone, a dozen women in matching team shirts, proudly displaying their first competition targets. The technical resources were limited, they explained, but the determination was abundant. They had studied Morgan's online instructional content, adapting the principles to their available equipment. We have qualification match next month, one explained proudly. First time our country allows women's division in National University. Championship. Morgan felt a wave of perspective wash over her. While she had been focused on her own preparation for world-level competition, the ripples of her work had been spreading in ways she hadn't fully appreciated. These young women, in a country where female participation in shooting sports had been minimal, were creating their own path inspired partly by her example. "I'd like to see you compete someday," Morgan told them sincerely. "Perhaps at this same championship in the future." Their expressions brightened at the suggestion, the possibility suddenly seeming more concrete than dream. Morgan took a team photo with them before continuing to the athlete area, carrying a renewed sense of purpose that transcended her personal competitive goals. The remaining days before competition passed in a structured rhythm of practice sessions, equipment maintenance, and team meetings. Morgan maintained her pre-dawn ritual, arriving before sunrise to commune with the range in its most honest state. As the competition drew closer, she noticed other elite shooters beginning to adopt similar patterns, seeking the same unfiltered feedback from the environment. On the evening before competition began, the U.S. team gathered for a final strategy session. The team coach, a former champion who had initially been skeptical of Morgan's unorthodox training methods, now incorporated many of her approaches into the national program. "Tomorrow brings the most demanding course of fire in international competition," he reminded them. "The wind conditions at this facility are notoriously complex, with redirected currents from the surrounding hills creating micro-patterns that change throughout the day." He nodded toward Morgan. "Reed has been gathering dawn data all week. I'd suggest we all pay attention to her observations." Morgan opened her data book, sharing the patterns she had documented each morning. How the wind typically began from the northeast, before shifting clockwise as the sun warmed different faces of the surrounding terrain. She had mapped these patterns with scientific precision, creating a predictive model that team members could reference during their firing relays. "The key is anticipating transitions rather than reacting to them," she explained. "There's a roughly 14-minute cycle to the major shifts. If you time your shot sequence to these patterns, you can minimize variables." The team absorbed her analysis with professional focus, several members taking notes or photographing her diagrams. The atmosphere wasn't one of competition between teammates, but of collective excellence, each contributing their specific insights toward mutual success. As the meeting concluded, the team coach addressed them one final time. "You've all earned your places on this line. Trust your training, trust your process, and remember that you represent not just yourselves, but a tradition of American marksmanship excellence." Morgan returned to her accommodation that evening with a sense of calm readiness. She reviewed her competition plan once more before setting it aside, then called her grandfather, now approaching 90 but still sharp-minded and deeply invested in her shooting career. "All set?" he asked, his voice carrying across the miles with familiar warmth. "As ready as I can be," Morgan replied. "Range is challenging but fair. Equipment is performing consistently. And the competition? World-class. Several former champions in peak form. The German team looks particularly strong this year." Her grandfather chuckled softly. "Sounds like you're in your element. Remember what I told you when you were 12? Morgan smiled at the memory. "The target doesn't know who's shooting at it." "Exactly. Just like always, one shot, one breath, one moment at a time." They spoke a while longer about technical details that would have been incomprehensible to most, but represented the specialized language they had shared since her childhood. When they finally said goodnight, Morgan felt centered and connected to the foundations that had brought her to this world stage. Competition morning arrived clear and cool, with a light mist clinging to the lower sections of the range. Morgan followed her established routine: a specific breakfast, precise hydration, and arrival at the range 2 hours before her scheduled relay. She prepared her equipment with methodical care, each item arranged in its designated position, each connection verified multiple times. The opening ceremony passed in a blur of national flags and official speeches. Morgan remained focused inward, mentally rehearsing her process while maintaining awareness of environmental conditions. When competitors were finally called to their assigned firing points, she moved with deliberate calm, establishing her position with the same care she would give a championship deciding shot. The international course of fire was structured in alternating relays over 2 days, with cumulative scores determining final placement. Day 1 would feature the precision stage's deliberate fire from established positions at known distances. Day 2 would introduce the dynamic challenges: time pressure, position transitions, and targets at unmarked distances requiring range estimation. Morgan's first relay began at mid-morning, when the sun had burned away the mist but before the heat created significant mirage distortion. She settled behind her rifle with practiced efficiency, establishing natural point of aim and confirming the perfect alignment of body, equipment, and target. When the command came to commence fire, Morgan entered the performance state she had cultivated through thousands of hours of disciplined practice. External awareness narrowed to the essential elements: position integrity, breathing rhythm, wind indicators, target. Each shot followed the same sequence: read conditions, make adjustments, establish position, control breathing, press trigger with consistent pressure, follow through, evaluate result, reset. Her first string grouped tightly in the center scoring ring, establishing an early position near the top of the leaderboard. She maintained this performance through subsequent relays, neither accelerating her pace when ahead nor rushing to catch up during occasional setbacks. The process remained constant, regardless of intermediate results. By day's end, Morgan stood in 3rd position overall, 2 points behind a German champion and 1 behind a surprising newcomer from South Korea. The U.S. team held 2nd place in the national standings, with all members performing creditably against the world-class field. The evening team meeting focused on analyzing Day 1 results and preparing strategies for the more dynamic challenges ahead. Morgan shared observations about how the range conditions had evolved throughout the day, patterns that would likely repeat during the final stages. "Tomorrow's wind will be stronger based on the forecast," she noted, showing a weather model on her tablet. "But the pattern should remain consistent. If anything, the more pronounced indicators will make it easier to read transitions between microcurrents." As team members discussed technical adjustments and mental preparation for Day 2, Morgan noticed Dominic watching her with an expression of professional admiration. He had qualified for the team the previous year and had proven a valuable teammate, his competitive experience complementing her analytical approach. "You've changed the culture," he said quietly as the meeting dispersed. "Not just for women in the sport, but how all of us approach precision at this level. It's more systematic, more evidence-based." Morgan considered his observation. "I just applied what made sense to me," she replied. "The rifle is a mechanical system operating within physical laws. Remove variables, control what you can influence, and account for what you can't." "Makes it sound simple," Dominic said with a smile. "The principles are simple," Morgan acknowledged. "The execution under pressure is what separates competitors." At this level, Day 2 dawned with gusting winds that confirmed Morgan's forecast. The dynamic stages would be even more challenging under these conditions, requiring competitors to make rapid adjustments while maintaining positional stability through complex movement sequences. Morgan began her preparation with the same pre-dawn session, noting how the stronger winds affected bullet trajectory at various distances. She made minute adjustments to her equipment setup, compensating for the more volatile conditions without fundamentally changing her approach. The day's competition opened with the transition stage beginning prone, then moving to kneeling, seated, and finally standing positions, with limited time between position changes. This was where technical skill met physical conditioning, where hours of cross-training and position practice translated to stable platforms under stress. Morgan moved through the course with controlled efficiency, establishing each position with the same attention to fundamentals despite the time pressure. Her shots grouped consistently, maintaining her position near the top of the leaderboard. As other competitors struggled with the demanding conditions, the final stage would determine individual and team champions, a dynamic course, requiring competitors to move between firing points while engaging targets at unmarked distances under strict time constraints. Points were awarded not just for accuracy but for appropriate target prioritization and time management. As Morgan stepped to the starting position, she felt a familiar calm settle over her. The challenges ahead were significant, but defined variables to be managed through the systematic application of training and experience. She closed her eyes briefly, centering herself in the moment, then signaled her readiness to the range. "Officer." The course unfolded in a series of technical problems to be solved in real-time, reading terrain to estimate distances, calculating wind holds with minimal reference data, establishing stable positions on uneven surfaces, managing breathing during physical exertion. Morgan worked through each element methodically, maintaining awareness of time without allowing it to rush her fundamental process. When she fired her final shot and checked her watch, she had completed the course 17 seconds under the maximum allowed time, with all targets engaged in optimal sequence. Her performance had been technically sound, though whether it would be enough to overcome the German leader's advantage remained to be seen. The scoring team processed results with meticulous care, verifying each competitor's target impacts and time records before posting final standings. Morgan waited with professional patience, reviewing her performance mentally and noting refinements for future competitions, regardless of the outcome. When the results appeared on the main display, a murmur ran through the assembled teams and spectators. Morgan Reed, world champion by a margin of 3 points, having delivered the most consistent performance across all stages, despite not winning any individual relay outright. The U.S. team had secured second place overall, their best result in 15 years of international competition. The achievement registered with Morgan not as exultation, but as quiet confirmation that systematic preparation and disciplined execution yielded results at the highest level of competition. She accepted congratulations from teammates and competitors with genuine appreciation, acknowledging the collective excellence that had elevated all performances. During the medal ceremony, as the American anthem played and the flag rose, Morgan found herself reflecting not on the gold medal now hanging around her neck, but on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From being dismissed at her first national competition to standing atop the World Championship podium, each step had been built on the same foundation: excellence as its own purpose, performance as its own validation. As formal photographs were taken and media interviews began, Morgan noticed movement at the edge of the spectator area. The group of young women from the host country's university team had returned, watching the ceremony with undisguised admiration. Beside them stood an older man whose weathered face and proud expression marked him immediately as a coach or mentor. When the official obligations concluded, Morgan made her way to where they waited. The young women congratulated her enthusiastically, asking for photos and sharing how they had studied every detail of her performance throughout the competition. The older man stepped forward, extending his hand. "I have coached shooting for 32 years, he said, his English careful but clear. "Always I told women they should shoot in separate division with lighter rifles. Today I watched you outshoot every man on this range. Tomorrow I change how I teach." His simple statement carried more weight than any trophy. This was the real victory, not just personal achievement, but the transformation of perspectives that had limited potential for generations. Morgan shook his hand firmly, recognizing a fellow teacher whose willingness to evolve would benefit countless future shooters. The aftermath of the championship brought a whirlwind of media attention. sponsor inquiries, and speaking invitations. Morgan navigated these with the same disciplined approach she applied to competition, recognizing their importance to the sport's growth while maintaining focus on her core purpose, the pursuit of excellence and the creation of pathways for others to discover their capabilities. 6 months after her World Championship victory, Morgan stood once again at Whispering Pines Shooting Complex in Montana. The facility had expanded considerably since her first impromptu clinic, now featuring dedicated training ranges, classroom facilities, and accommodations for visiting shooters. The National Development Center served as headquarters for the program she had helped create, hosting clinics and training camps throughout the year. Today marked the beginning of a special session, an advanced instructor certification course for those who would carry methodologies to regional centers across the country. The 20 participants represented diverse backgrounds and experience levels, united by their commitment to expanding precision shooting beyond its traditional boundaries. Among them was Elise Carter, the engineering student whose questions at Morgan's first clinic had revealed such analytical potential. Now graduated and working for a ballistics research firm, Elise had developed into a formidable competitive shooter in her own right, while simultaneously creating innovative training tools that made complex concepts accessible to beginners. "Welcome to the Advanced Instructor Development Program," Morgan began, addressing the group assembled on the main range. "Over the next 10 days, we'll focus not just on perfecting your personal marksmanship, but on developing your ability to systematically analyze and improve others' performance." She gestured toward the firing line, where an array of technical equipment stood ready. "We have tools that can measure minute variations in position stability, trigger control consistency, and breathing patterns. But the most powerful analytical tool remains the trained human eye that can connect mechanical issues to their underlying causes." The participants listened with focused attention as Morgan outlined the program's structure, alternating between their own skill development, teaching methodology, and practical application with volunteer students of varying experience levels. "The goal isn't to create clones who shoot exactly like any particular champion," she emphasized. "It's to help each shooter discover their optimal approach based on their unique physical attributes, cognitive patterns, and specific challenges. Excellence has common principles but individual expressions." As the group dispersed to begin their first practical exercise, Morgan took a moment to appreciate how far both she and the sport had come. The dismissive attitudes she had encountered at her first national competition hadn't disappeared entirely. Change rarely happens completely or instantaneously, but significant evolution was undeniable. Participation demographics had diversified substantially. Equipment manufacturers now designed for a broader range of body types and strength profiles. Competition formats increasingly emphasized technical skill and decision-making over raw physical attributes. These changes benefited all participants, creating a more inclusive and technically sophisticated sporting culture. Morgan's personal journey had come full circle, from a solitary shooter seeking validation through performance to a leader helping others discover capabilities they hadn't recognized in themselves. The gold medal from the World Championship held a place of honor in her grandfather's living room, but her true legacy was unfolding daily across ranges nationwide. That evening, after the first day of instruction concluded, Morgan stood alone on the main firing line as sunset painted the Montana landscape in gold and crimson. The range was quiet now, the only sound the gentle Montana breeze moving through prairie grass. She thought about the young woman who had once been told she couldn't handle recoil, who had been dismissed and underestimated until performance rendered judgment irrelevant. That journey hadn't been about proving others wrong as much as proving to herself what was possible when artificial limitations were rejected. The next generation wouldn't face exactly the same barriers, but they would encounter their own challenges, requiring similar resilience. Morgan's role now was to provide both technical foundation and living example, showing that excellence recognized no artificial boundaries when pursued with disciplined determination. As darkness settled over the range, Morgan gathered her notes and turned toward the administration building, where tomorrow's instruction plans needed final review. The path ahead was illuminated not just by achievement, but by purpose, using hard-earned expertise to expand possibilities for others. The rifle didn't care who was behind it. That simple truth had always been her foundation. Now it served as cornerstone for a movement that extended far beyond one shooter's journey from dismissed outsider to world champion. The future would be built shot by shot, student by student, mind by mind, a legacy more meaningful than any medal or record. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.